Is love still real after betrayal and secrets? Have you ever looked into the eyes of a stranger, and seen an entire lifetime you somehow already knew? Boston. 6 a.m. Late season snow still clung to the stone steps of St. Michael's Church. A woman, impeccably dressed in a black cashmere coat, her face weary yet her eyes unshaken, stepped out of a silver Lexus. That was Dr. Rebecca Monroe, leading cardiologist at Beth Israel Hospital, a symbol of grace and success in the public eye. But behind the awards and elegant clinic rooms was a heart that never stopped bleeding. Her husband, Aaron Monroe, a software engineer at a major medical tech company, had died 2 years ago in an unexplained brake failure accident. Since then, Rebecca had come to this church every morning. Not because she was devout, but because only here, in the quiet stillness, did she feel Aaron still watching over her. And every day, there was always a man seated at the bottom of the church steps, unkempt hair and beard, wrapped in a worn wool blanket, holding a reused Starbucks paper cup. His name was Sam. No one knew where he came from. He never left that spot, as if waiting for something, or someone. Rebecca dropped a few coins into Sam's cup like she always did. He looked up, gave a small nod. His eyes were cloudy and deep, carrying a look she couldn't name. "Thank you, Dr. Monroe," he whispered, his voice so hoarse and soft she had to lean in to hear it. Rebecca froze. "How do you know my name?" Sam didn't answer. He just smiled, a sorrowful smile, and bowed his head, as if trying to disappear into his own shadow. Rebecca turned away, her heart beating faster. Maybe he'd overheard someone calling her. Or maybe, just coincidence. She stepped into the church, but her mind was no longer present. What would you do if one morning, the homeless man you always helped whispered, "I know what really happened to your husband"? Comment your answer. Keycap 1, I'd walk away, I don't believe him. Keycap 2, I'd demand the truth. Keycap 3, I'd secretly follow him. That evening, Rebecca set the dinner table like always, for someone who no longer existed. She still kept 2 place settings. The chair across from hers always empty, but never removed. She never got used to that absence. Because in her heart, it never felt real. That night, she dreamed of Aaron standing outside the church door. He said nothing, just reached out his hand. And behind him, Sam, seated, staring into her soul with those endless eyes. She woke up drenched in sweat. Was she imagining too much? But the next day, something she never imagined, actually happened. Boston. Rain out of nowhere. Early spring showers, as always, uninvited, cold, haunting. Rebecca stepped out of the church, clutching her bag as wind cut across the stone steps. She bent down, ready to drop a few dollars into the familiar paper cup. But Sam didn't reach out. He just looked up, rain pinning silver strands of hair to his forehead. His eyes, no longer tired, no longer distant, but brimming with something serious. "Dr. Monroe," he said, slowly and more clearly than ever. "I don't need your money anymore." Rebecca blinked. She gave a nervous smile. "Changed your mind today?" Sam tilted his head, as if listening to a message carried by the wind. Then he continued, voice trembling but utterly serious. "I need you. I want you to marry me." The world seemed to freeze. Rain still fell, but Rebecca heard nothing but those words. Her wet leather shoes felt glued to the cold stone. "What did you just say?" she gasped. "Marriage," he repeated, slower. I have nothing to offer, except the truth. Rebecca let out a dry, stunned laugh. You're insane. You think I'm crazy because I sit here every day. But you don't know what I see from here. Sam said nothing more. He pulled the blanket over his head, as if the conversation was over. Rebecca stood frozen in the rain, unsure if she had just faced a madman, or something far more terrifying. The truth. That night, she couldn't sleep. Questions swirled in her head. How did a homeless man know her name? How did he know Aaron used to love standing on those very steps? She remembered what Aaron once said. The chill of stone reminds me that life isn't comfortable, it's precious because it's fragile. Sam had said the same thing. The third time their eyes met. The next morning, she returned to the church. Sam was there, but without his paper cup. Just a man, waiting. Rebecca didn't drop any money. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what game you're playing, she said, voice sharper than usual. Sam didn't flinch. He softly replied, I know I don't deserve to speak with you. But I know something about your husband's death. And if you give me a chance, I can prove it. Rebecca froze. Her heart pounded. Aaron's face suddenly clear in her mind, like a wound reopened. What? Your husband didn't die the way the report said. What the hell do you know? I know, because I was there. Rebecca turned away. She couldn't take it anymore. But behind her, the rain still fell. And those words, I was there, cut into the past she thought she had buried. Rebecca didn't return to the church for 3 days. She told herself it was because of hospital shifts, but truthfully, she was afraid. Not of Sam, but of the truth he might carry. If what he said was true, then for 2 years she had mourned a lie. Loved a man who hadn't died, but was hiding from her. On the 4th day, she pulled up to St. Michael's. Sun blazed hot after days of rain. Sam was no longer on the steps. Strangely, her heart sank. She turned to leave, when a raspy voice called from the side of the church. I thought you weren't coming back. Sam leaned against the brick wall, hands in his torn coat, eyes unnervingly calm. I owe you nothing, Rebecca said firmly. No. But I owe you. She squinted. Another cryptic answer. You said you knew what happened to my husband. Then say it. No more games. Sam stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to her. It was a map of an old warehouse near Franklin Street, an abandoned industrial zone on Boston's outskirts. Tonight 10 p.m. There'll be a deal going down. Maddox's people will be there. Maddox. Raymond Maddox. CEO of Y-Dyne. You've heard of him. Rebecca went pale. Y-Dyne, the company Aaron worked for before he died. She clutched the paper. Her gut twisted with suspicion. How do you know all this? Because I used to be part of it. She left the church, rain-dampened map in hand. She immediately called someone, Detective David Klein, the original investigator of Aaron's case. David, I have something. You need to be at this location at 10 p.m. possibly a drug deal. Trust me. Rebecca, what's going on? Are you involved in? I can't explain. But I believe you're the only one who hasn't sold out to Maddox. David sighed. All right. But if this is real, we're walking into a hornet's nest. Be careful. 10 p.m. The Franklin warehouse. Chillingly silent. Undercover police were in position. Rebecca sat in her car, heart pounding. At 10:12 p.m., a gray, unmarked truck rolled into the lot. 4 men in suits stepped out. One carried a briefcase. Another handed over a small black bag, certainly not legal meds. Cops swarmed in instantly. Down. Boston PD. Yells. Running footsteps. Warning shots cracked through the air. Rebecca, trembling in the car. For the first time in her life. A cardiologist, was afraid of her own heart. The next morning, headlines broke out across Boston. Boston police arrest 3 individuals linked to Y-Dyne's illegal drug ring. Internal complicity suspected. Rebecca returned to the church. Sam was sitting there, as if he'd never left. "How did you know?" she asked. "I listen. I see. I've always been closer than you think." "I don't believe you. A homeless man can't possibly know those things." Sam looked up. His voice turned low and steady. "Because I wasn't always homeless." She stood frozen. "And your husband wasn't always dead." Rebecca knew then, she had passed the point of no return. Sam wasn't just some eccentric. He was the last remaining thread that could unravel a truth she wasn't ready to face. But if Aaron was truly alive, then everything in her life, the grief, the funeral, the long silent nights, had been orchestrated by someone hiding in the shadows. 3 days after the Franklin warehouse raid, Rebecca returned to St. Michael's. Sam was there. Same spot. Same posture. Still as stone. But this time, he didn't bow his head. He looked straight at her, a gaze so piercing it made Rebecca freeze halfway up the stone steps. She stared into his eyes. And for one brief second, her heart clenched. Not from fear, but from recognition. She had seen those eyes thousands of times. When Aaron watched her make tea. When he looked at her during their first rainy winter night. When he stood before her in the hospital, the last time, before the accident. "How do you know about Aaron?" she asked, her voice dry. Sam didn't answer. Rebecca tightened her grip on her handbag. She was about to walk away, when he said quietly, "Rebecca, do you remember the first time you and Aaron stood in Copley Square? When he pretended to lose his wallet and you overturned an entire coffee cart looking for it?" She froze. That story, she had never told anyone. Not friends, not colleagues, not even family. Only her. And Aaron. How do you know that?" she whispered, lips trembling. Sam pressed his lips together. He looked up toward the sky. The morning sun lit his face, and for the first time, Rebecca saw a homeless man who looked hauntingly beautiful in that light. "There are memories," he said, "that don't need to be spoken, to be real." She stepped back. Her heart pounded against her ribs. A mix of anger, hope, and terror surged all at once. "If you're someone familiar," she said, "then why hide? Why not just tell me?" Sam gave a sad smile. "Because the truth isn't just something you deserve to know. Sometimes, it's something that could destroy you." That night, Rebecca sat alone in her office. She opened her computer. She pulled up the photo she had secretly taken of Sam a few weeks ago. Then she opened a facial recognition program. She uploaded a photo of Aaron, from their wedding day, where he was smiling so brightly his eyes crinkled with joy. She hit compare. Her heart stopped during the 3-second processing time. Result. Similarity, 78%, potential familial or identical match. Further verification recommended. Rebecca jumped from her chair. She couldn't sit still. Everything was crumbling. If Sam was Aaron, then why? Why fake his death? Why let her mourn for 2 years in loneliness? Why return, and say nothing? Or was he not Aaron? Just a ghost? Wearing his shadow? Rebecca had no way back. She called Lisa Chen, a forensic expert. Sent her Sam's photo. Sent a video clip of him speaking outside the church. Lisa replied a few minutes later. Something in the tone, in his expressions, it sounds a lot like Aaron. But I'll need a real sample to compare. Can you get hair, saliva, or a personal object? Rebecca nodded silently in the dark. If this was Aaron, she had to know. And if not, she needed to find out who this man was. And why he knew too much about things that should have died with her husband. The next morning, she went back to St. Michael's. Sam wasn't there. A newspaper boy nearby pointed around the church. He just went to the memorial garden. Rebecca followed, heart racing. She turned the corner, and stopped cold. Sam was kneeling before the statue of Saint Francis, hands clasped, lips moving in prayer. But what shocked her wasn't the posture. It was the ring on his finger, a platinum wedding band engraved with R&M, until the last breath. It was the ring. The one she and Aaron had custom made. Only one copy for each of them. Rebecca ducked behind a column, covering her mouth to stop the sob that rose. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was standing there, in the light, on the face of the man she had once kissed goodbye at a funeral. The scent of burnt chemicals and rust still clung to the wreckage. Rebecca stood in the ruins of the Franklin warehouse, now a twisted skeleton of steel. Detective David Klein wore gloves, sifting through scorched documents. "This is all that's left," he said, handing her a fireproof evidence bag. Inside, a half-burned photo. She took it with both hands. It looked like a security cam snapshot. In a dim office, 3 men in a meeting. 2 seated, 1 standing. The standing man was tall, lean, with loosely curled brown hair, wearing a white rolled-sleeve shirt, and eyes that looked exactly like Aaron's. At the bottom of the picture, a partially burnt label read, Y-Dyne Project Black Root 2022. Rebecca staggered back. Her head buzzed. "David," she said, "I need to know exactly where and when this photo was taken. And who's in it? We're working on it." "But, Rebecca, I have to ask. Do you think that man is Aaron?" She clutched the photo. "I don't think anything. I need the truth." That evening, Rebecca returned home and pulled out an old habit. She opened the home surveillance archives. Back when Aaron was alive, they had installed small cameras in the hallway and front entrance, after a string of break-ins around Beacon Hill. She found a grainy clip from 12 days ago. 12:37 a.m. A figure stood at her door. Didn't knock. Just stood there. Then, the man's left hand gently touched the door handle. A familiar, almost unconscious gesture. She had seen it 1,000 times. It was Aaron's strange habit, always tapping the door before turning it. The figure turned and walked away. Rebecca zoomed in. Though the hood obscured the face, the posture, the gait, the way he turned his head. It was Aaron. She couldn't deny it anymore. The next morning, she returned to St. Michael's. Sam wasn't there. she asked the newspaper boy. He shook his head. He didn't come this morning. But I saw him last night. He went toward the old train station. Rebecca turned, heart sinking. She ran toward Redstone Station, abandoned for years, once Aaron's favorite photo spot for graffiti back when they were young. On an old concrete wall, she found a new mural. A heart, cracked in two. And beneath it, written in silver paint. Until the last breath, I kept the truth. Rebecca reached out and touched the fresh paint. Her eyes blurred with tears. She returned home. On the table, Lisa had sent the DNA results via email. Match confirmed at 99.9%. The man known as Sam is Aaron Monroe. Rebecca didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't collapse. She just sat there. One question echoed in her mind like a church bell. Why? Rebecca walked over to the old wardrobe. In the very bottom corner, she found Aaron's old jacket, the one he had worn for the last time. She instinctively checked inside, a reflex she couldn't explain. And there, she found a crudely stitched seam. Inside, a folded piece of paper. She pulled it out. A blueprint of Y-Dyne's basement. One hidden room was marked. A single handwritten line at the bottom. Don't trust any report. The answers are always below ground. Rebecca knew something far greater than death was buried beneath this. Sam, or Aaron, had left her one final message. A door had opened, and on the other side was no longer just pain. It was a choice. Between forgiveness, or a truth that could destroy her all over again. Rebecca had never broken into a building in her life. But tonight, she stood in front of the Y-Dyne Biopharma headquarters. Dark coat. Hair pulled up. Thin gloves on. She carried an old ID badge, sent by Tyler Knox, a retired security guard and former friend of Aaron's. Do you believe I'm doing the right thing? She asked him over the phone before going in. No, Rebecca, Tyler said. I know you're doing the right thing. But the truth may not save anyone. At 12:23 a.m., Rebecca slipped in through a maintenance tunnel. The halls were so quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat. The blueprint Aaron left guided her to a steel door hidden behind the first floor supply room. No label. No guards. No fingerprint scanner. Just an electronic keypad. She closed her eyes. Tried a familiar number. 0516, their wedding date. Click. The door unlocked. Inside was a vast, cold basement, thick with dust and the smell of rusted metal. She stepped in slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Covered shelves. File boxes. Anti-static cases holding hard drives. A dusty electrical board bore the faded label. Restricted, classified archives. Rebecca pulled the tarp off a computer terminal. She powered it up. The screen flickered. Then a prompt appeared. Access code required, user, A. Monroe. Her hands trembled. Aaron had sat here. Worked here. Maybe even planned everything, from this room. She typed in a password. St. Michael 2022. Access granted. She opened a folder titled, Black Root, Deep Cavity. Inside were covered surveillance videos, records of untested drugs, intercepted emails between top executives. An audio recording began to play. Aaron, if you keep talking about ethics and humanity, we'll shut the project down. And believe me, shut down doesn't mean paperwork. It means people. It was the voice of Raymond Maddox, smooth, cold, and absolutely resolute. Rebecca couldn't breathe. She moved deeper into the archives. Her flashlight caught a shadow. She gasped, nearly screaming. An older, thin man stood there. Graying hair. Worn lab coat. Holding a small notebook. "Please don't scream," he said softly. "I'm the last one left to watch over this place. Because he asked me to." "He?" Rebecca asked. "Aaron." Rebecca's breath caught. "Why are you still here?" The man, Henry Miles, had been Aaron's assistant in the engineering division. He quietly pulled a file folder from a drawer. "You need to see this. But understand, when he left it for you, he knew he couldn't ever come back. Because no one leaves Y-Dyne with the truth intact." Rebecca opened the folder. Inside were autopsy photos that did not match the body identified as Aaron. A handwritten letter from Aaron. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means I either succeeded, or failed so completely, there's nothing left to hide." A red USB drive, labeled, "Final Witness." Rebecca looked at Henry. "Why are you helping me?" "Because Aaron couldn't finish this journey on his own. And you are the last step he left behind." She slipped the USB into her pocket. The basement seemed to shiver. Maybe from a draft through the ventilation ducts. Or maybe, a feeling that what awaited her wasn't a secret, but a reckoning. A karmic blow buried deep by those who had built power on silence. Rebecca's apartment stayed lit all night. She placed the red USB on the table. A cold cup of tea beside her. Laptop open. And her heart, no longer whole. For a moment, she hesitated. "If you're reading this, it means I either succeeded, or failed so completely, there's nothing left to hide." Aaron's words pressed into every fracture of her memory. Cracks she thought had closed were just dust covering the edge of the abyss. She plugged in the USB. One single folder appeared. /Monroe/echoes. She opened it. First file, voice_note_03.mp3. "Rebecca, if you're hearing this, please be patient. Don't cry, okay?" She cried anyway. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because if I stayed, more people would have died. Including you. Y-Dyne isn't just a pharmaceutical company. They created something worse than drugs. A covert system of biological control, disguised as clinical trials. And I was the first engineer to crack the original data. When I uncovered it, they found out. And they chose the solution they always do. Kill me. Or make me disappear." Second file, video_footage_room7.mp4. The screen showed a stark white room under dim, blue light. The cameras shook slightly. A man stood in the center of the room, his back to the camera, and his voice spoke. "My name is Marcus. I was a trial patient for drug YDX13. They said it would cure my anxiety disorder. But I lost my memory. I hear voices in my head. I'm no longer myself." Marcus wept. Someone off-screen threw him a pill. Marcus swallowed it. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed. The screen went black. Rebecca trembled violently. Final file, message_final_for_r.mp4. The camera wavered slightly. Aaron's face appeared, gaunt, his eyes so deep they seemed to swallow the night. "I don't know how long I'll survive, but if you're watching this, it means I believe you're strong enough now to face it. You asked why I didn't let you come with me. Because I knew you wouldn't turn back. You've always been the light, and I had to become the shadow. If you can, forgive me. And if you can't, I'll still love you the same way I did each morning I sat outside the church, just to see you smile one more time. The screen went dark. Rebecca didn't cry anymore. She just stared into the endless dark between two windows. In that moment, she was no longer a cardiologist. She was a wife. A witness. And the last one left with the clarity to turn truth into light. Rebecca picked up the USB and slipped it into her jacket pocket, hands still trembling. Outside, dawn had broken. A weak light pierced the misted window. She knew now. This wasn't Erin's story anymore. It was her battle. And she would begin where it all started, St. Michael's. Where the man who carried the weight of the world's darkness had sat, just waiting for her to be brave enough to walk toward him. When Rebecca entered Maddox's office, soft rain was falling in Boston. No appointment. No warning. No polite request. She wore a long gray coat, the USB in her pocket, and eyes that no longer hesitated. The 30th floor reception at Y-Dyne HQ barely had time to say, "I'm sorry, you don't have an appointment," before Rebecca pushed through the doors of the executive suite. Raymond Maddox, the man who had outlasted 3 U.S. presidents, was seated behind a black mahogany desk. Behind him, an abstract painting of 2 hands bound by thorns. "Rebecca Monroe," he smiled without standing. "I suppose you're not here to discuss the weather." Rebecca didn't reply. She took out the USB and placed it on the desk. "I believe you know what this is." Maddox raised an eyebrow. He didn't touch it. "I also assume, you haven't given it to the press." "Not yet," Rebecca said. "Because I wanted to hear you say it first." "Why?" Maddox stood, leisurely pouring bourbon into 2 glasses, even though he knew she wouldn't drink. "You were a doctor. You understand, sometimes, to save millions, a few must be sacrificed." "Erin wasn't a few," she said coldly. "He was a fool," Maddox sighed. "A man who brought ideals into a world ruled by reality and profit." Rebecca clenched her fists. "You think faking his death was a failure?" Maddox looked at her, all pretense gone. Just cold, naked disdain. "I think you've just put yourself on the list of people who need to be managed." Rebecca gave a faint, grim smile. "You missed your chance. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to warn you." She stood up and placed her phone on the desk. The screen showed it was recording. "The USB has 3 copies. One with my attorney. One sent to the FBI. And one, being slowly uploaded online, unless I enter a kill code within 24 hours. Maddox froze. She saw it, a flicker of rage behind his eyes. "You still have one option, confess. Turn yourself in. And I swear, I'll keep your name from the mouths of the children affected by YDX13. Maddox growled through his teeth. "You think you're winning?" Rebecca walked out without looking back. "I don't need to win. I just need the truth to outlive your lies." The door closed behind her. Inside, Maddox hurled the glass against the wall. That night, Rebecca returned to St. Michael's. And sat beside Sam, Erin, as she had every morning before. They didn't speak at first. Only the sound of light rain, and church bells ringing softly through the mist. "I saw him," Rebecca said. Erin didn't turn his head, but closed his eyes. His chest sank, like a weight had finally been lifted. I didn't choose forgiveness. But I chose to end it. Aaron turned to her, eyes reddened. You've always been stronger than I believed. Rebecca reached out and took his hand. For the first time in 2 years, they touched, not with longing, but with reality. Rebecca understood one truth. Sometimes, light doesn't come from a heroic act. It comes from someone who no longer fears the dark. She was no longer the doctor who saved hearts. She was the woman who protected the true heart. Her own, and the man she loved. Monday morning. Boston City Hall was packed with press, cameras, and a storm waiting to be named. The man declared dead 2 years ago has returned. Aaron Monroe, in a simple black suit, freshly trimmed hair and clean-shaven face, stepped out into the main hallway between two federal agents, unshackled. Standing beside him was Rebecca, her hand tightly holding his. Behind them, a team of attorneys, FBI representatives, and human rights observers. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Monroe, why did you fake your death? You know that's a federal offense, right? Ms. Monroe, do you forgive him for this?" Rebecca gripped his hand tighter. Aaron didn't shy from the spotlight. He stepped forward and faced the crowd. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to say, if I had to choose again, I would still do the same." Silence swept the room. "I was the lead engineer on Y-Dyne's Black Root project. When I discovered the company was conducting illegal biological trials on uninformed patients, I reported it. Their response was to stage a car crash to kill me. I survived. And I disappeared. Since then, I became a ghost in their system, quietly gathering documents, submitting anonymous tips to law enforcement. And most importantly, protecting the one person I couldn't afford to lose, Rebecca." He turned to her. That same look as before, but now from a man who no longer needed to hide. Below, some wept. Others sighed. A few closed their notebooks. The truth doesn't always comfort. But it frees. After the press conference, social media exploded. Megaphone hashtag Aaron Monroe. Fire hashtag Ghost Engineer. Camera for love, I chose to vanish. For truth, I chose to return. Rebecca and Aaron left City Hall surrounded by reporters. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt free. That night, they sat on the steps of St. Michael's. Just as they had once, and as if for the first time again. Rebecca poured tea from the old kettle Aaron had once adored. She smiled at him and asked, "So now what? What does a dead man do next?" Aaron shrugged. "Start over. But this time, with you. No more secrets. No more warehouses. No more shadows." She rested her head on his shoulder. Rebecca whispered softly, as if to herself, "Maybe life doesn't really begin when the heart beats, but when we dare to live true to our own." Beside her, the church bells rang. But this time, they weren't a funeral chime. They sounded like the heralding of something reborn. 3 weeks after Aaron stepped back into the public eye, life still hadn't returned to normal. Not because the world doubted him, but because Rebecca still did. She still smiled during interviews. Still held Aaron's hand at justice conferences. Still answered, "We're happy," whenever asked about the future. But when night fell, when the cameras shut off, and Aaron went to bed first, she would slip out onto the porch, to the very steps where they had first met in the fog, where a familiar-eyed homeless man once made a strange proposal. "I don't want your money. I want the truth. And I want you." Back then, she hadn't believed him. And now, she wasn't sure how much of her memory was real anymore. One early morning, before sunrise, Rebecca quietly left the house. She returned to St. Michael's. Not to pray, but to cry. She sat exactly where Sam once had, holding a paper coffee cup, and wept. Not because Aaron had lied. Not because the truth was painful. But because her heart had learned to survive without him. And now, it had to learn all over again. With a man who brought back both love and scars. Footsteps approached behind her. Aaron sat down beside her. He said nothing. Just handed her a weathered gray handkerchief, embroidered with the initials R.M. "Do you want to hear the final truth?" he asked. Rebecca nodded, wiping her tears. Aaron exhaled, gazing toward the church bell tower. "I didn't just fake my death for justice. I also did it, because I was afraid you'd forgive me." Rebecca turned to him, startled. "I knew you could endure the pain. But I was afraid you'd carry it alone, like you always did. And if you forgave me, I'd never be able to forgive myself." Another tear fell from her eye. But this time, not from pain. Because now, she understood. Forgiveness doesn't erase the wound. It means carrying the scar, as part of a love that's still alive. That day, Rebecca and Aaron decided to leave Boston. Not to run, but to begin again. In a quiet lakeside town, Rebecca would open a free clinic. And Aaron would teach coding to rural kids. They didn't need cameras, or press coverage, or the world to believe in their love. They only needed mornings together, with warm coffee, and sunlight spilling over the old stone steps, where one had once died, and the other had lived in solitude. And now, they had found each other again. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with a hand held still, no longer trembling, and a truth that no longer needed to be proven. Love doesn't need to win. It only needs the courage to return, even from death. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share one thing this story taught you, and how you'll carry it into your life. Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story moved your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue crafting stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.